This is In Conversation With. My name is David Batsoffen, and I'm here with a breaking news story. And joining me to talk about it is the associate editor of the Daily Maverick, that's Brooks Spector. Brooks, hi, how are you doing?
Good to be with you, David. This is a weighty topic indeed, but it's certainly one that has to be discussed and analyzed and understood and
Well,
contemplated.
thank you so much for joining me. I've done some research on this. Firstly, we're talking about the most recent school shooting, which was at the Robb Elementary School in Texas, which happened just a few days ago. 22 people have died there so far. But I believe that shootings in America, school shootings in America, go all the way back to 1764, when a school, believe it or not, the schoolmaster and either 9 or 10 pupils were shot and killed by 4 gunmen at that stage. In the 1800s, there were 13 shootings in that decade. What is it about school shootings in America, Brooks, that seem to have, I mean, there are other shootings. There's shootings in synagogues, there's shootings in fast food stores, there's shootings in malls, there's shootings in movie houses, but the school shootings seem to be endemic to the United States, with the exception of North Dakota and West Virginia.
I mean, the thing about school shootings, I mean, right off the top, I mean, they're part of this larger tapestry, obviously, of people with an itch or a mental circumstance or a psychological problem. They look for targets. The thing about a school, of course, is that the targets are all rather conveniently brought together in rooms for you. And they're usually sort of segregated by age. So you can pick the level of disproportionateness that your weird view desires. And the force differential is extraordinary. I mean, the pupils are sitting at desks or doing something educational, and the shooter bursts in with assault rifles, and the reaction is what it is. I mean, people run or they hide, or a school security guard shows up, and then there is or isn't a exchange of fire, and then the police eventually arrive, and there is or isn't an exchange of fire. But the thing about it is that it is far too often, as far as I can tell, in looking back over this tapestry of killings, somebody who's had a grievance or a problem that has been unresolved, or a psychological condition that has gotten worse, or they feel the need to rebalance something somehow, some way, and given the American circumstances, the go-to way of doing it is to grab your gun and deal with the teachers or the children,
Violence,
or the symbol of the state. Now, in my mind, the preeminent version of this took place, I think it was 1964, and this really got us on the wave of this at the University of Texas, when a young student climbed up to the top of a tower.
That's right.
On the campus. You may remember it.
I do indeed.
And he also had a long gun, and he was literally shooting at students as they walked across the
campus.
The campus. He was sufficiently good as a marksman that he killed a number of them, wounded others. And I think that really sort of marked a change in the way people behaved. I don't want for a minute to say it normalized it, but it managed to make it seem to people that this was something that people would do in extremis, or in the recesses of their mind. But park that for a second, and drop back to the general circumstances of the United States, its history and its politics and its society. Remember, the country is at its heart, in the myth of the country, or the myth that people carry. It's a settler country, and you have to take up weapons to defend your family, your home, against external forces, whether it's a grizzly bear or the indigenous people of the land or a British army. And this somehow feels right and proper to defend and to use a weapon. Now, in those days, of course, you're using a long gun that has one shot and you have to reload.
I was about to bring that up, Brooks, because when the Second Amendment was written, it was musket country. I mean, I don't know where and why assault rifles are even. I mean, if you go back to Columbine, the guys that were the shooters at Columbine bought their arms and ammunition at a Walmart, because in those days you could.
Well, remember too that the United States is a tapestry of 50 states, each of which has slightly different or significantly different laws and customs. And in some states, you can walk into a grocery store or a big box, all things on sale store, sort of a mass mart type of thing. Walmart's bigger than any mass mart you could envision. Actually, they're corporate, they're joined in a corporate sense anyway now. And in some states, you can just buy a rifle. In many states, not all certainly, in most of the big states, you can't, with the exception of, say, Florida and Texas. You can buy guns online through the mail, through delivery.
I mean, it's ridiculous. And I suppose the question that everybody's answering, and sorry to jump in, but I know that time-wise, we're both on a deadline, that where will this end? You know, the Republicans are sitting in the Senate now and going, we won't change. The gun owners are going, you don't include us in anything, so we're not going to change. And you can bet your bottom dollar that there's going to be another Sandy Hook or another Robb Elementary School, and people are going to leap up and down. I mean, I saw online today, people are saying, well, what about obesity and car accidents? But that's not this. And you can't make a comparison between people dying of diabetes or being killed in a car accident against going to school, doing what you normally do. And some guy with not one, but 2 assault rifles and body armor walks in and then kills as many people as he can before he mainly is shot or arrested.
Actually, you can make a comparison with car accidents and car deaths, because you can't drive a car without it being properly licensed.
Okay, I suppose so.
And legally, you can't drive the car that is properly licensed unless you personally are licensed and have an examination to prove that you aren't going to run into people because you don't know what you're doing. And that, in effect, is the core of one of the arguments about how to handle weapons. And in recent memory, a ban on assault rifles was passed, assault rifles being the kinds of things that the young man in question was doing the other day. And when the ban was enforced, the numbers of killings actually went down. And then when it expired, because it had a time limit on it, when it expired, you'll never guess what happened. The numbers of killings went back up.
Well,
you mentioned the Second Amendment. I think your listeners probably need that explained a little bit more. That when the Constitution for the country was written and accepted back in 1787, so we're talking about almost 2.5 centuries ago now. Times were different. The country had 4 million people. It was a narrow strip of territory on the east coast of the United States, mostly rural. The biggest city had maybe 40,000 people in it. And the country had achieved its independence largely by citizen armies who had come together to support a small permanent army of few thousand men. And the Second Amendment to the Constitution passed in 1788, I believe, or 89, stipulated that the right to bear arms shall not be infringed, but there was an important qualifier for a well-regulated militia. And the idea was that people could
defend themselves.
Defend themselves especially against the rampaging of a professional army being used to impose its will upon an innocent citizenry. And what has happened over time through interpretation and a lot of three-card Monty, I guess, legerdemain, this has been transmuted into, we are allowed to have guns of any type, shape, form, and efficiency without any regulation whatsoever, except nibbling at the edges. Now, in the US, you can't go out and buy a fully functioning tank, with armor-piercing shells and machine gun mounts on it. You're not allowed to own one of those. You can't own an RPG-7, which is a
rocket launcher,
shoulder-launched grenade. You're not allowed to own a fully functional jet fighter that is fully supplied with weaponry, for good and reasonable understandings. I mean, otherwise you're chaos. And if you can buy a gun the ways we've already talked, or even worse, and I'm going to give one thing people don't mention much, the ghost gun. What is a ghost gun? It's not Casper the Friendly Ghost. It's you buy a gun that's in kits and you assemble it. So it's not even a gun when you buy it. It becomes a gun after you put the firearm in it.
Only after you put the bullets in. The other thing that I want to ask you, because I mean, we can go off at a tangent about weaponry, is in all of these instances, where are the parents of these alleged assassins? Because they're all 18 to 20-year-olds, yet the parents, with the exception of that last lot who ran and who were captured in a warehouse, and they're supposedly going to be charged because the kid was given a gun for his birthday. But why aren't these parents front and center going, we terribly sorry? You know, thoughts and prayers don't really help at the end of the day. But why aren't they being exposed to the general populace? Is there something that I'm missing, Brooks, that allows them to hide in the shadows?
Well, actually, there is something you're missing, and it's not obvious, but it's there lurking in the background. Many, perhaps most of these young men, and these are almost all these young men, somewhere between the ages of 18 and 30, they're coming out of dysfunctional families. They're coming out of, in this case, in the particular case, his mother was a single parent. She had a serious drug addiction problem. He was living with his grandmother and occasionally with an aunt. So right there, the functional family, the nuclear family was already torn apart. And there's a limit to the amount of structure you can enforce on that kind of circumstance. Throw in another factor. And I know there'll be howls of people saying, TV doesn't kill people, bullets, people kill people. But there is an enormous amount of impact on very impressionable and not well held together minds. Violent video games or computer games, film, television, other forms of online entertainment. If you are of that kind of character already, and I'm separating this slightly from the white supremacist view, which is also another form of mental problem, but this is a little bit different. You are more affected by the fantasy of killing and maiming and hurting because it gives you power over an environment somehow.
Okay.
And you put all these things together in a particularly toxic stew, and then you throw in the element of what's usually simply called the gun lobby, which refuses to allow any of the legislators that it supports any freedom to say, wait a minute now, this is crazy. The gun lobby doesn't consist primarily of gun manufacturers. It's because the gun manufacturer is not an extraordinarily lucrative business to be in anymore. A number of them have gone out of business, in fact. But the National Rifle Association has really changed its spots over the last 50 years. it used to be all about gun safety and proper treatment of weapons and education about firearms and all that. And now it's become a political force, not entirely unlike the anti-abortion lobby.
Which is a whole different conversation for another day, Brooks, because I see that's about to change as well. But let's not go down that road. I want to thank you for your time. You've put it into perspective. And I suppose that I don't want to say we'll chat again when this next happens, because it isn't going to stop. It isn't going to stop here. I've been chatting to Brooks Spector, who's the associate editor of the Daily Maverick, and we've been unpacking some of what goes on with school shootings in the United States. Brooks, thanks very much for joining me at short notice.
Not a problem. Anytime, David.